placed our warfighters in jeopardy, escalated conflicts around the globe, and led to a catastrophic humiliation on the world stage that claimed the lives of 13 American soldiers, including one Missourian, during the disastrous withdrawal from Kabul. On the economy, rampant inflation drove up the cost of life's essentials, making them unaffordable to countless hardworking families. In the realm of culture, the regime censored free speech, closed down churches, targeted traditional Catholics and parents at school board meetings, and let an unelected class of left-wing radicals degrade, attack, and lie about our history and our heritage. A poisonous anti-Western, anti-American ideology that had once been confined to elite university classrooms suddenly became the official White House policy. All of this was done not in isolation. It was sustained, defended, and covered for by an alliance of elite institutions, from the media to the so-called expert class to big tech to the federal bureaucracy itself. When we speak of collusion among elites, or the so-called deep state, we're accused of being conspiracy theorists. But this was no theory. It was plain and overt, out in the open for everyone to see. For 4 years, we had a president who could barely string together coherent sentences after 6 p.m. Yet, this glaring fact went unreported, undiscussed, and unaddressed. Why? Because the Democrat Party, corporate media, federal bureaucracy, and big tech companies collaborated to conceal the truth from the American people, not out of ignorance, but because it advanced their own interests. In the absence of a functioning president, chaos took hold. An empty vessel occupying the Oval Office becomes a puppet for those surrounding him. Many elected officials, including some in this chamber, have used auto pens, a mechanical device that replicates a signature. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, so long as we are the ones actually making the decisions. But under President Biden, the auto pen became a troubling symbol, a symbol of an absentee president and an executive branch directed by nameless, faceless aides that no one outside of Washington, D.C. had ever heard of and no one ever voted for. It was the auto pen presidency, a government run by committee rather than a leader chosen by the American people. By contrast, love him or hate him, we all know President Trump is in command of his presidency, and he is the one calling the shots. It is plain as day that President Trump is actively making the decisions, whether announced via Truth Social or signature. Under President Biden, that transparency and certainty evaporated. We cannot confidently say that the decisions bearing his signature were the will of the president or his Politburo. That goes doubly for his social media posts, including his decision to drop out of the 2024 presidential election. We did not know if it was his decision or posted on his behalf after a palace coup because President Biden was mentally unfit to serve. The corporate media played an indispensable role in this cover-up, systematically suppressing discussion of President Biden's condition. As we will demonstrate in the video evidence presented today, dissenting voices were silenced, and the truth was buried. It was not a passive oversight. It was deliberate. It was a deliberate campaign to shield a narrative that protected the interests of the most powerful. Even members of this very committee, some of whom served alongside then Senator Biden when he chaired this very committee, defended his mental acuity for years. Now Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson offer a convenient narrative to absolve everyone involved. The media lacked access, the family was overtly protective, the cabinet was incompetent, and Robert Hur said the president was merely a well-meaning man in aviators who liked ice cream. It is the tired, evasive refrain of the politician caught in a lie. Mistakes were made. Yes, mistakes were made, and every participant in the cover-up, from the media to the cabinet, is jointly and severally liable for what may very well be the greatest deception in our nation's history. Even their apologies today are framed in a way that absolve them from responsibility for this crime against the American people. They apologize for having missed the story. They didn't miss anything. They actively chose to ignore or run cover for the people in power. The Biden cabinet rarely met, and some members, like former Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, deliberately distanced themselves from the president to to maintain plausible deniability. Even members of this committee were part of the Great Deception. The Monday after Biden announced he would not seek re-election, one member called the idea of invoking the 25th Amendment outrageous, insisting the debate performance does not reflect who he is or his capacity to govern as President of the United States. Another member repeatedly vouched for Biden's fitness, declaring, Joe Biden is fit, capable, and ready to serve another term. And later, this is a man who is sharp, who is on top of his game, who knows what's going on. Yet another, during the 2020 Democrat presidential primary, alluded to Biden's decline, but quickly retracted his remarks when it became politically expedient. After the debate, yet another member praised Biden's strong delivery of remarks to NATO as evidence of his capacity to lead. The purpose of this hearing is not to interrogate Biden officials or partisan reporters, though they should be held accountable. Instead, our focus is to identify and rectify the systemic weaknesses that allowed this situation to fester unchecked. Our distinguished witnesses, experts in White House transparency, operational procedures, and executive power will assist us in diagnosing these flaws. While the House and Senate pursue fact-finding missions to hold these responsible to account, our mission here is to chart a path forward. We cannot allow another weekend at Biden's presidency with its glaring national security vulnerabilities papered over by an autopen. The DC establishment might argue that the governance of a shadowy, unelected figures is a legitimate substitution for a functioning president. It is not. The American people cast their vote for a president, not a faceless apparatus. Article 2 of the Constitution vests immense authority in the President of the United States, a single individual. With that extraordinary power comes equally profound responsibility. At the Constitutional Convention, our founding fathers debated giving the President the title of Defender of the Rights of the American People. The security and well-being of the American people and their rights must take precedent over personal ambition. It is often said that power corrupts. I believe that power reveals. Over the past 4 years, this cover-up laid bare a disturbing reality. The left and the corporate media place their pursuit of power above the welfare of your families and your country. They dismissed your observations, urging you to not to trust your own eyes. We have a solemn duty to call this what it is, an abdication of constitutional duty. As was stated in Federalist 51, ambition must check ambition. If a president is mentally unfit to serve, we need a dependable mechanism to, at the very least, ensure that the truth reaches the American people. I look forward to the insights this hearing will yield and from our expert witnesses in the discussion that will follow. The public is counting on us to ensure this never happens again, because we won't always be fortunate enough to have a leader like President Trump who is so unmistakably in command. Senator Welch.
Thank you very much. Senator Cornyn indicated the view of the hearing is that there was a constitutional crisis as a result of the cover-up of President Biden's decline. I believe there is a constitutional crisis. It's the collapse of Congress asserting its Article 1 authority to make decisions about the well-being of the American people. What has this Senate debated in the months that we've been here, other than nominations? Have we discussed the possible war with Iran? Have we had a serious discussion on the floor about the massive and mounting debt? Have we had any discussion about the abdication of congressional spending authority by the impoundment actions of an administration? Have we had a discussion about climate change that is causing havoc throughout the world? What we've done is gone to the floor and haven't debated. We've gone to the floor and voted on nominations. There's another issue of great concern to me, because I have enormous respect for my colleagues. Each and every one of us who was elected, it's the highest honor of our life. Each and every one of us came here because it is in our bones that we want to try to do something beneficial and make life better for the people we represent. and we have different points of view. But instead of this Congress debating those different points of view about oil exploration or about clean energy, about a good healthcare system, what we do is turn that debate into personal accusations of motivations, of cover-up, of conspiracy, of bad character, of demeaning folks who disagree with us. So we never get to the discussion about how do we have a healthcare system that works for the people in Texas, the people in Louisiana, and the people in Vermont. We never get to the discussion about are we going to deny the reality of what you know is true, climate change, and how do we address that in a way that maintains a strong economy and actually builds a strong economy. We get into the accusations that if you disagree with me, you're a left-wing radical. We get into these discussions that if you disagree with me, you're a Marxist. We get into these discussions that fan the perception of the people we all represent, who desire nothing more than be able to take care of the families, live with some security, make a contribution in the communities where they live. That if a person disagrees with you, they are a bad person. We will get nowhere with that approach. Now, so many of the things that happened in the Biden administration, I totally supported, and many of you totally opposed. Those are policy disagreements. He came in with COVID. We got through COVID. We can debate about how we did it, but that was an accomplishment. The American Rescue Plan, we had the biggest jobs creation in the history of the country. The CHIPS and Science Act, acknowledging that we have to have a strong economy and be able to have the best chips here manufactured in the United States. We did that. The Federal Disaster Program improved significantly. And I can go on. And I'll take up something where we didn't do well, and that's immigration. You won that argument. But does it mean that those who disagreed with you and along the way were bad people, should be labeled Marxist, should be condemned? The American people ultimately gets to decide. But to the extent that we have a responsibility that we share, Republicans and Democrats, whichever side of the issue you're on, is to debate the issue and not debase the people who are in the debate. That's what I see as the crisis that we're facing in this Congress. Our refusal to engage in the serious discussion about the issues that are having such an impact on the people we represent. And I'm going to tell you what I think is a cover-up. I think this big, beautiful bill done by reconciliation, where by decision of the majority, not a single member of the minority who represent half of the citizens of this country can even be in the room when the terms and the policies are being debated. We are not there. That is what I call a cover-up, because our responsibility to the people we all represent is to debate health care, is to debate our budget, is to debate about the debt that we're going to be leaving future generations. And there is no debate in what is going to be decided in the private back rooms amid discussions, not even of all the Republicans, but of some Republican leaders. That's what's going to have a lasting impact on the people every one of us represents, whether it be in Missouri, Texas, North Carolina, or Louisiana, or Vermont. We can't even do our jobs because we're not allowed to be in the room. So, sure, we can enjoy the pleasure of looking back at the Biden administration and then getting into the weeds about when and where and how the president was acting at any given moment. But you know, I ask myself before I get into a debate and before I do anything, why am I doing it? And if I do it, does it have the potential to make things better for the people I represent? And if the answer is no, it doesn't have any opportunity to help the folks in Vermont, I just shut up. That's what I do, because it won't help. what we're doing right now won't help. It will not help. And I ask myself, why in the world are we doing it? But we know the answer to that, because the politics that has been embraced in this Congress is the politics of accusation, of demeaning adversaries, of deflecting from engaging in the hard discussion about hard issues and trying to come to some common agreement that's going to be to the mutual benefit of all of the people that we represent. I yield back.
Thank you. We'll now introduce the witnesses. First up, from my left to right, John Harrison. John C. Harrison is the James Madison Distinguished Professor and Class of 1941 Research Professor at the University of Virginia School of Law. He's a graduate of the University of Virginia and the Yale Law School. After graduating from law school, he engaged in the private practice of law, then clerked for Judge Robert Bork on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. From 1983 to 1993, he worked at the U.S. Department of Justice, including as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Legal Counsel. He joined the law faculty at the University of Virginia in 1993. In 2008, he was on leave from the law school to serve as counselor on international law and legal advisor to the United States Department of State. His principal academic fields are structural constitutional law, administrative law, federal courts, and constitutional history. Skipping over the empty seat to Theo Wald. Theo Wald is a visiting fellow for law and technology policy at the Heritage Foundation. Wald is the former Solicitor General of Idaho. Previously, Wald served as the acting assistant attorney general in the Office of Legal Policy at the Department of Justice and deputy assistant to the president for domestic policy under President Donald Trump. Wald clerked at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit for Judge Janice Rogers Brown and the U.S. District Court for the District of Puerto Rico for Judge Jose Fuste. Wald is an intelligence officer in the United States Air Force. Wald holds degrees from Georgetown University, where he studied government and English, and from the University of St. Andrews, where he studied English literature, and a JD from the University of Notre Dame. Mr. Wald and his wife have 5 children and live in Boise, Idaho. Sean Spicer. Mr. Spicer served as the 30th White House press secretary, is the author of 4 best-selling books, and the host of the Sean Spicer Show. Mr. Spicer previously served as communications director and chief strategist of the Republican National Committee and worked for several members of Congress. He currently serves on the board of visitors of the U.S. Naval Academy, holds master's degrees from the U.S. Navy War College, and is in his 26th year of service in the U.S. Navy. Mr. Spicer is a native of Rhode Island and resides in Virginia. It is the tradition of this committee that all witnesses will be sworn in. If you'd please rise, I'll swear you in now. Raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. And now we'll start with you, Mr. Harrison, with your opening statement. Sure, Mike there. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Smith, Senator Cornyn. The committee has asked me to discuss Congress's power to regulate the process by which the president's signature is affixed to a document other than a bimanual signature, that is to say the use of an auto pen or similar technology. I have 4 points to make. The first is that the Constitution and the laws generally, when they require that the president act by signing a document, do not require that the president manually sign the document. The Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel wrote an opinion on that subject in 2005, which is quite extensive, and I find it persuasive. The concept of signature is signing a document is more general than, like a lot of concepts, more general than its central application. The central application is manual signature, but that's not the only way by which someone can sign a document. Someone can also sign a document by indicating that the person signing the document has decided that that person's signature should be affixed to the document by some process other than manual signature. The second point is that as a general matter, Congress has power to carry into execution the constitutional powers of the other branches of government. The last power that is conferred on Congress by Article 1, Section 8, is the end of what's called the Necessary and Proper Clause, and it provides that Congress shall have power, I'll read the whole clause, to make all laws which will be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, that's Congress's other powers there in Article 1, Section 8, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. That's the last part. That's the part that's relevant here. It's sometimes called the horizontal necessary and proper clause because it operates horizontally among the three co-equal branches. Congress is the legislature. There are times when one of the other constitutional powers can use support that can be given only by the force of law. And that is something that Congress can do with a horizontal necessary and proper power. The next thing I'll say is there are some principles, I think, that should govern exercises of the horizontal necessary and proper power. The first is that it operate to support, to assist, to make cause to function better, the power that is being carried into execution, be it that of the president or that of the federal courts. The second is that in supporting the other powers, Congress not seek to exercise powers that are vested elsewhere, like the power to decide cases, like the president's power of pardon. And third, when Congress exercises that power, it should make sure not to put substantial burdens on the exercise of the other powers that it's seeking to support, powers that once again are vested elsewhere than in Congress by the Constitution. I think Congress can regularize the process by which the president's signature is affixed without his manual signature in a way that would be consistent with Congress's horizontal necessary and proper power. In particular, Congress can require that when the president indicates that his signature is to be affixed to a document without manual signature, that that decision by the president be documented and some individual record that the president has made that decision, and that be made part of the public record, say by being published in the Federal Register or the weekly compilation of presidential documents. A statute like that would carry the president's power into execution because making sure that the president really has made a decision and that it wasn't made by someone else with the president's auto pen is a way to make sure that the power is properly exercised, that is, by the president. As long as a statute like that is completely neutral, applies the same way to all presidential decisions, it shouldn't raise any problem of Congress trying to control the president's authority. Again, constitutional powers are vested in the other branches and supported by Congress under the horizontal necessary and proper power. And third, a requirement of documentation. Well, the White House does a lot of documents. The requirement of documentation would not place a substantial additional burden on the president and the processes by which the president acts. And I would suggest that if the committee consider legislation along these lines, that it inquire into the paper flow process currently used in the White House so that any statute Congress enacts will make that process work better rather than burdening it, making it not work as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wald.
Senator Corbin, Senator Schmidt, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning about how the cover-up of President Biden's mental decline endangered America's national security and undermined the Constitution. The U.S. Constitution vests executive power in a single person, the president. At the founding, the president exercised the executive power through only a small group of trusted advisors and personnel. In fact, President Washington had a 4-member cabinet. Today, the president directs a Leviathan executive branch with 15 cabinet departments and at least 4 million full-time executive branch employees. The executive branch proliferation has a single source of democratic legitimacy, that by order of the U.S. Constitution's Article 2, the president is both elected by the American people and vested with the executive power, all of it. Traditionally, the president takes positive actions and authenticates those actions through his signature. His signature is required for the most significant actions he may undertake: to sign an executive order, to take any action invested in him by the Constitution, as in granting a pardon, and to take the most important action of all, to sign a bill into law. In all these cases, the president's signature is itself the protection of democratic principle. When the president signs, he communicates his assent and endorsement of the action he takes. The auto pen is a device that signs the president's signature to a document. The oversight project, of which I am a board member, has discovered that the Biden White House deployed an auto pen to affix President Biden's signature to pardons, prison commutations, executive orders, and presidential proclamations. The Oversight Project's research has found that the Biden White House first deployed the auto pen to affix President Biden's signature to a proclamation on day 5 of his administration, and that there were at least 3 different auto pen signatures in use throughout President Biden's tenure in the White House. In June 2022, the Biden White House began deploying the auto pen to sign clemency warrants and executive orders. Auto pen use skyrocketed from there. We found that of the 51 clemency warrants issued during the Biden presidency, over half, 32 in total, were signed with an auto pen. And these include some of the most controversial acts of clemency of the Biden presidency, including death row commutations and the preemptive pardons of members of the Biden family, Dr. Anthony Fauci, General Mark Milley, and more that were issued in the final days of the Biden presidency. We reviewed President Biden's schedule and his publicly available media and were unable to find any record of President Biden's personally approving these actions, such as a statement issued by the president himself to reporters. In addition, we found that the Biden White House used the auto pen to affix President Biden's signature to clemency warrants and executive orders while the president himself was in Washington, D.C. for at least some of that day, and thus was presumably available to sign important executive actions. Finally, we found multiple days where President Biden wet-signed a bill into law, but used an auto pen to issue an executive order or for other important executive actions. The Biden White House's widespread use of an auto pen to affix President Biden's signatures to documents that exercise executive powers belonging solely to the president poses significant constitutional, legal, and practical considerations. Once the president's signature is copied and loaded into the auto pen, the machine can sign documents as the president himself would. To be blunt, by using the auto pen, anyone can sign documents as the president himself. Now, to be clear, I'm not here today to suggest that the auto pen is bad. It's just technology. I'm here today because of questions concerning President Biden's capacity and whether the auto pen was used to usurp presidential power or to conceal the president's decline. As the sitting president's mental acuity declined, potentially to the point of incapacitation, his administration's expansion of the powers of the presidency raises more questions than answers. Any investigation into this matter should focus not only on whether President Biden directed or authorized subordinate staff to take action in certain instances, but whether he had the capacity to do so at all. The 25th Amendment lays out clear procedures for what to do when the president is incapacitated. It was carefully drafted and informed by our nation's history. The Biden administration ignored it all to aggrandize executive power and push the country further in their preferred ideological direction. It is our obligation at this point to get to the bottom of these issues and to ask the important question as to whether or not the auto pen and other devices were used to cover and obscure President Biden's mental decline, undermining our national security and also the Constitution. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning.
Right on time, pretty impressive. Thank you. Mr. Spicer.
Chairman Schmidt and Cornyn, members of the committee, thank you for having me. I was asked to share my experience as a senior White House staffer with respect to the interactions that I and other senior staff had with President Trump during his first term. During my tenure as press secretary, I interacted with the president multiple times every day. Most days I would talk to him by phone or in person early in the morning and then multiple times throughout the day, including weekends. For the most senior positions in the White House, those designated by the rank of assistant to the president, which includes the White House chief of staff, the White House counsel, and the press secretary, it is critical to have regular interaction with the president. The position of press secretary especially demands this type of consistent and intentional communication. I or any other press secretary, regardless of administration, could not do the job effectively without regular communication with the president. It was my responsibility to have the most up-to-date understanding of President Trump's position on policy, personnel, and everything in between. Admittedly, I made a couple of rather high-profile mistakes during my tenure. You may have read some of them. But in all cases, those mistakes occurred when I wasn't connected with the president's thinking or position on a particular issue or policy. Coordinating and collaborating among even the most senior staff cannot replace direct communication with the president himself. In my position, I was very well acquainted with the president's work, his day-to-day responsibilities, and his fitness for office. I watched him serve with the strength and endurance of a man half his age. As you can see on almost a daily basis through events, statements, and social media posts, he's up early and ends his days very late. Yet in several instances during his first term, the media questioned his fitness for office. Guests and so-called experts like Sanjay Gupta at CNN were called upon to speculate on the result of Trump's physical and mental well-being. The Washington Post ran hit pieces with headlines like, "The White House struggles to silence talk of Trump's mental fitness." Vox wrote, "Is Trump mentally unfit to be president?" NBC ran a story by the Associated Press that raised mental health concerns regarding the president. CNN's Brian Stelter questioned if members of the news media were, quote, tiptoeing around obvious questions about President Trump's instability. These headlines were not isolated instances. Most major news outlets ran with these ridiculous type of propaganda pieces. To use one of the media's favorite terms, these inquiries were without evidence. That brings us to the juxtaposition of how the very same media covered the Biden administration. To be blunt, the legacy media failed the American people. They failed to do their job. Many, rightly so, believe the media in this country is culpable in covering up the obvious decline of the 46th president of the United States. The scrutiny that was baselessly directed at President Trump during his first term was wholly absent from the media coverage of the Biden White House. The media lacked any sense of curiosity that would naturally stem from what the public could see with their own eyes. Even in the face of deeply concerning and public signs of President Biden's mental and physical decline, legacy media outlets were silent. Biden and his senior aides flatly dismissed the need for a cognitive test during his tenure, as had been requested of President Trump. Yet no protest was heard from the voices that were so critical of Trump. With the exception of a couple White House reporters like Fox News Channel's Peter Doocy, reporters generally refused to breach the subject at White House briefings. News outlets weren't the only ones complicit in covering up Biden's decline. Presidential staff would have or should have been interacting with Biden on a daily basis. At best, his administration was grossly negligent. At worst, Biden's staff actively concealed his fitness for office. When White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said President Biden could run circles on her, there were only two possible conclusions: that she herself was in poor health and in need of medical assistance, or that she was lying. There is no question that a vast difference between how President Trump interacted with his staff and how President Biden did. Whether one supports President Trump or not, he is clearly the most accessible and transparent president in modern history. And there is no question who is running this country. The same cannot be said of President Biden. It is the president who is elected by the American people. The role of staff is to execute his agenda and policies. I thank the committee for holding this hearing so that going forward, the American people can have the confidence in who is running the country and making critical decisions. The American people deserve no less.
Thank you for those opening statements. The minority did not call any witnesses for today's hearing. They have chosen to ignore the hearing as they chose to ignore President Biden's mental decline, but we do have a short video of some previous statements from the Biden administration officials and Democrat Party officials telling us not to believe our lying eyes. We can play the video.
Does the president have the stamina, physically and mentally, do you think, to continue on even after 2024?
Don, you're asking me this question. Oh my gosh, he's the president of the United States. You know, I can't even keep up with him.
The most difficult part about a meeting with President Biden is preparing for it, because he is sharp, intensely probing, and detail-oriented and focused.
I can testify because I've been working very closely with this president for the past 2 years. I've been knowing him for 30 years. And I'm telling you, this guy's tough. He's smart. He's on his game.
Joe Biden has vision. He has knowledge. He has a strategic thinker.
The president is focused. He's detail-oriented. He's always thinking about the big picture.
He is engaging. He is capable.
He has an incredible record as president.
And I'm often with him on foreign trips. He's at the top of his game.
So he has a vision, he has knowledge, he has judgment, he has a strategic thinking.
I met with the president, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks ago, and he seemed fine to me.
I have complete confidence in the president. I have watched him expertly guide meetings of staff and cabinet members. I could not have more confidence in the president.
I would just tell you that I meet frequently with the president, and every single time I meet with him, he is just fine.
But he is, again, knowledgeable, wise.
Incredibly sharp, incredibly probing, incredible command of the details.
He is sharp. He is on top of things.
There is nothing to these challenges, these suggestions that somehow he's not sharp and he's not capable.
We see Joe Biden up close. We know how attuned he is to the issue.
And you're going to see how smart he is and the experience he has.
I say his age is an asset.
He's wise. Yes, he's wise. He has wisdom. He has experience.
And his experience, because of his age and his wisdom, has been invaluable to this country.
A lot of countries, people who've been in office a longer period of time are praised for their wisdom.
I have seen a lot of 72-year-olds not as capable as this 80-year-old.
It is hard for us to keep up with this president.
His mental acuity is great. It's fine. It's as good as it's been over the years. He's fine. All this right-wing propaganda that his mental acuity has declined is wrong.
And this kind of sense that he's not ready for this job is just a bucket of BS that's so deep, your boots will get stuck in.
Yeah.
Okay. Professor Harrison, I do want to ask a couple questions. I just want you to presume for a moment that that a pardon was issued under President Biden's auto pen signature, but issued without his direction. It comes to light that that he actually didn't direct it. A member of his staff used the auto pen for a pardon. What recourse is available under those circumstances?
Well, Senator, I think there would be two questions. The first has to do with whether, and I can't answer it other than to identify the question, which is to say, sometimes documents that are properly authenticated are treated as having been validly issued even when they're not. That can happen. There are legal rules that produce that result, and I don't think there is such a rule about a pardon, but I would have to inquire into that again because there are such rules. The other thing I'd say is that for a pardon particularly, the only situation I can think of that clearly would bring into question whether the pardon was valid, which was the first question, was if the government sought to prosecute someone and the person who reportedly received the pardon offered the pardon as a defense, then the government might say that no, the pardon was invalid and therefore you weren't pardoned, you're still subject to prosecution. There might be some other way for a question like that about a pardon to come up. I can't think of another, but that's the one I can think of.
So from your perspective, let's just say that if there isn't any other legal recourse other than the one that you sort of brought up, what advice would you give to this committee or this Congress or this Senate to address that? What remedies could the legislative branch enact?
It's hard to think of anything Congress can do ex post. That's why I do think that it would be advisable ex ante to improve the process of authentication and make it more clear that documents that are signed by auto pen really do reflect a decision by the president. That done in advance will make whatever the authentication system is more reliable.
Mr. Wald, given sort of the role that you played in trying to provide more transparency of what happened during the 4 years under Joe Biden, who was running the country under Joe Biden? Let's just take the last 2 years.
It's a great question, Senator, and at some level, I'm not the right witness for this hearing. I mean, there should be members of the media here, maybe some of your Senate colleagues who had known the president over the years and obviously had close proximity during the time of his administration, and obviously his staff. I think, sort of align with your previous question, there is a real consideration here on authentication. And in my time in the first Trump White House, there was an exhaustive process to determine how paper flowed into the Oval and when the president had given his assent to a certain action. That was through, in fact, 2 different policy channels, the staff secretary, and then there was also an office, essentially of policy management, guiding the flow of documentation. If the Biden administration staffers and personnel wanted to put this to bed, they could very easily dispel all of this by saying, here are the documents that show the president assented to these actions. The Trump administration would have that. Previous administrations would have that. And if that's not there, then there is cause to improve the way that executive branch employees authenticate actions undertaken by the president.
Yeah, I mean, the president actually performing the functions of president is kind of an important thing in our constitutional order. You had, kings used to affix their seal to show that this was an official declaration from the sovereign. In this country, the sovereign are the people. They delegate, the authority to their elected representatives. And as you mentioned in your opening statement, there's only one person elected by everybody. So that signature, this is not just a small point, that signature issuing a pardon for someone who'd been convicted of a crime, or in the case of Joe Biden, these preemptive pardons, which are sort of unprecedented, is a big deal. And I think that's part of the reason why we're here today. Mr. Spicer, I wanted to ask you, you alluded to this, but the media, so desperate to make sure President Trump never got back into office. Of course, you saw the lawfare that took place, but then, of course, this narrative that Joe Biden was fine, don't believe your lying eyes, until that they couldn't deny it anymore based on the debate. Could you just kind of compare that to your experience when you were, press secretary for President Trump, to sort of the inquiries that were made daily about his mental acuity versus the inability to do that during the 4 years under Joe Biden?
Senator, in many cases, there was no inquiry. They would just run with a story, having guests on that would question his physical or mental acuity, speculate on it, bring guests on that would speculate it. We would often then push back on those kind of stories. That's in vast contrast to the lack of any kind of curiosity that existed throughout the 4 years of President Biden. And I think the difference was they would seize on the simplest thing with President Trump, whereas in President Biden's case, there was multiple issues of physical, mental confusion, him going in the wrong direction, him falling down, him misunderstanding an event or not being able to finish the sentence. That was never the case with President Trump. They were almost manufacturing instances in his case without actually trying to get to the bottom of a story or inquire within the press office to get our response. They would go with the story, then we'd push back. With Biden, my understanding from the conversations that I would have with the media is they would never ask. They just literally were basically afraid to go there.
Senator Cornyn.